the case of Nancy Paola Reyes García, what led to the crime against the pregnant woman, and what became of the child. The quest for personal happiness and a better life can be long, fraught with difficulties, and doesn't always yield the desired outcome. Many people are drawn to other countries or even the other side of the world in these pursuits, but sometimes, instead of finding the expected happiness, they encounter only pain, deep disillusionment, or even death. In the pursuit of dreams and overarching goals, it is crucial to remain aware of the people around us. The story of a young Guatemalan woman named Nancy Paola Reyes García has become one of the most resonant cases in Spain in recent years. The mother of two left Central America to cross the ocean in search of employment that could provide her daughters with a decent life and assist her elderly parents. However, the woman never returned home. Fragments of her disfigured and unrecognizable body were found with difficulty in desolate and nearly impassable areas. At the time of her crime, she was 4 months pregnant, and the perpetrator was someone García had hoped to share her life with. Challenging life in Guatemala, little is known about the early years of the woman named Nancy Paola Reyes García. She was born on April 13, 1991, in a small village named Granados in the Republic of Guatemala. Nancy was the second of 5 children in a very poor family. Her parents, Jorge and Prudencia García, struggled to make ends meet. Despite this, they did everything possible to ensure their children received a good education and could live better than they did. After finishing school, Nancy was able to enroll at the university in the city of Villanueva, where she studied business administration and document management. She was a diligent student and graduated with honors. However, despite her academic achievements, significant career prospects did not follow. She worked as a cashier in a large supermarket during her studies and later was promoted to administrator, but her career progression stalled there. During her university years, Nancy lived in an unregistered marriage with a young man whose name is not mentioned in public records, with whom she had 2 daughters. Unfortunately, this relationship did not lead to a long-term commitment, and the couple separated. The father of the girls subsequently lost interest in the fate of his children and did not provide any financial support. Decision to relocate. Nancy continued to live in her parents' house, now with her own daughters, working at the supermarket and seeing no future prospects. The family barely had enough money for essentials, and something had to change. In 2013, Nancy's older sister emigrated to the United States, where she soon found a good job, married successfully, and settled well. Inspired by her sister, Nancy decided to radically change her life too, but she chose to relocate to Europe, settling on sunny Spain. At that time, she didn't even have enough money to buy a one-way plane ticket, let alone funds needed for initial expenses. For several years, García worked diligently, saving enough money to finally make her dream come true in the summer of 2018. In July, she bought a ticket to Madrid and promised her parents that she would keep in constant contact so they wouldn't worry about her. She planned to find housing and a job upon arrival. She carried a few €1,000, enough to rent a room, cover food, and the most necessary items until she could secure a steady income. At the time of her departure, Nancy was 27 years old, and her daughters, who stayed with their grandparents in Guatemala, were 7 and 5 years old. Nancy didn't stay long in Madrid. After living in Barcelona for some time, she moved to the city of Ciudad Real, the center of the Spanish province of the same name. She called home almost daily, asking about her family's well-being, and she regularly sent money home, which increasingly helped her parents not only fully support themselves and her daughters, but also to renovate their old house. Nancy mentioned she didn't have an official stable job and was making ends meet through odd jobs, like cleaning in affluent homes or caring for the elderly and sick. Nancy never complained about the hardships. On the contrary, she told her family that Europe offered more opportunities. and she could never have earned as much back home, even working around the clock with no days off. It seemed she was completely satisfied with how her life was unfolding, and even spoke of eventually bringing her daughters to Spain once she saved enough to rent a spacious and comfortable home for the whole family. A fateful romance. For a while, Nancy didn't share much about her personal life, claiming she simply had no time due to work. But in the spring of 2020, she admitted to her parents that she had met a man with whom she had started a romantic relationship. His name was Carlos Andres Bustamante, and they had met by chance while Garcés was looking for new rental housing. As they resolved this issue, the couple grew closer and eventually started living together. Carlos was a year older than his beloved and, at the start of their relationship, did not have a steady income, surviving on random small jobs. In fact, Nancy was the main breadwinner in their relationship. She paid for housing and bills and often gave Carlos money for his personal needs and expenses. However, she never complained to her family about this, so her parents were confident that everything was fine, and their daughter had met a good man with whom she lived in love, harmony, and abundance. By that time, Nancy's 2 younger brothers had also moved to Spain, with whom she kept in touch. She was particularly close to Dennis, the youngest brother, who had even met Carlos personally and found him likable. At the end of June 2020, Nancy and Carlos decided to move to the resort city of Santander, located on the Atlantic coast. In a phone conversation with her family, Nancy mentioned that the climate was warmer and better there, and she saw more job prospects. However, at that time, certain difficulties began to appear in her relationship with Carlos, which she tried not to discuss with anyone. Bustamante turned out to be jealous, temperamental, and quite cruel. Moreover, he lacked any career ambitions and was completely satisfied being supported by a woman. Most alarmingly, he abused alcohol and occasionally indulged in forbidden substances, although he constantly tearfully promised to quit and find a stable job. Garcés was openly doubting whether to continue her life with this man when she discovered she was pregnant. Carlos was thrilled by this news and swore that from now on, their life would change for the better, but in reality, things only got worse. He continued to drink and use drugs, taking money from his civil wife or asking his mother for it. Moreover, he began to physically abuse Nancy, something she tried to keep from everyone. Alarming signals. On the evening of August 12th, while Nancy was video chatting with her parents, they suddenly heard Carlos loudly shouting and berating their daughter, demanding to know who she was talking to. He didn't believe her when she said she was speaking with her mother and snatched the phone from her hands. After verifying the truth by looking at the screen, he simply threw the device onto a chair and walked away. The next day, the situation repeated itself. Carlos again grabbed the phone from Nancy's hands while she was talking to her parents and daughters. He demanded to see who she was speaking with, insulted her, and even threatened harm. A frightened Nancy later explained to her relatives that her partner was just overly jealous and tried to reassure them that everything was fine. Her parents, however, tried to persuade her to contact the police, but she insisted that she could handle the situation herself. However, on August 17th, during a candid phone conversation with her sister, Garcés ominously stated that if anything happened to her, or if she suddenly died, Carlos would be solely to blame. Her words were chilling, but she did not elaborate further, only asking her sister to take care of her children if needed. This was the last time her sister heard Nancy's voice. Mysterious disappearance of the pregnant woman. On August 20th, around 2 p.m, Nancy sent a text message to her father, promising to call later that evening, but she never did, nor the next day, which was unusual for her. She also did not respond to calls from her family, prompting them to try contacting Carlos, but he did not answer his phone either. Since the couple had recently moved to Santander and had no friends there, and Nancy's brothers were on the other side of the country and couldn't quickly arrive to check on her, the situation was alarming. A few days later, a strange message came from Carlos's phone stating that he and Nancy had argued and decided to split up. Allegedly, she had packed her things and left in search of a separate apartment, was ignoring his calls, and he had no idea where she might be. Her brothers then suggested that Carlos should immediately come to Ciudad Real so they could go to the police together and file a missing person report. Carlos readily agreed, but as expected, he never showed up, did not file the report, and on top of everything else, he too stopped communicating with the Garcés family. Mother knew everything. The relatives of the missing woman themselves contacted the police to report her disappearance. Meanwhile, through Nancy's friends, her brothers found the address of Sandra Bustamante, Carlos's mother. When they visited her, introduced themselves, and explained the situation, she unexpectedly broke down in tears, confessing that she had suspected her son could do something terrible to his partner, but she did not elaborate on the details. Sandra also had no idea where her son and future daughter-in-law were. Carlos wasn't answering her calls but only sent brief messages, asking her not to ask questions and to give him some time. She liked Nancy, but knew her son too well and understood what he was capable of. The next day, Sandra was called in for questioning at the police station. Law enforcement wanted to discuss the disappearance of her would-be daughter-in-law and to find out the possible whereabouts of Carlos. She shared with the officers what she had already told the girls' brothers the day before and showed them a lengthy text message that Nancy had sent her a couple of days before she vanished. In the message, Nancy pleaded with Sandra never to give her son money, regardless of the tearful stories he might concoct. According to Garcés, he would spend it all on alcohol and banned substances, under the influence of which he became very aggressive and cruel. He had no desire to find a job or battle his addictions, and his behavior became increasingly threatening, prompting the pregnant woman to consider leaving him. She ended her message by saying it was better to end things now before anyone got hurt. Another disturbing detail also came to light. It turned out that Carlos had several prior convictions for causing bodily harm, and one of his first victims had been his own mother, whom he had brutally beaten when he was just a 17-year-old teenager. At that time, he had gotten off with probation, but later, after leaving his family home, he had served short terms for assaulting women with whom he lived and tried to form relationships. The oldest profession. The investigation was just beginning, but in the first few days, many curious details emerged that indicated this union was doomed from the start. In addition to Carlos being an aggressive, unemployed drug addict with a criminal record and suffering from uncontrollable bouts of rage, friends of Nancy revealed something interesting about her as well. It turned out that the woman was not merely a housekeeper or caregiver, as she had told her parents, because cleaning houses and caring for the elderly would never have brought in as much money as she was sending home every month. The slender, dark-haired Guatemalan with a striking appearance provided escort services to wealthy Spaniards and visitors alike. Indeed, her work was connected to the odd and sudden move to the resort port city of Santander, where she had more opportunities to earn. Carlos knew about his beloved's occupation, and initially he was fine with it since she fully supported them both, eliminating the need for him to find work himself. However, when she became pregnant, he began to lose his mind. Firstly, he was tormented by doubts about whether he was the father of the child, suspecting it might be one of Nancy's clients. Secondly, she continued to work even in her condition, and Bustamante was insanely jealous. He alternated between forbidding her to meet and talk with other men and forcing her to work when they ran out of money to live on. The money that the man took from his mother, he spent exclusively on himself and his vices. Horrific discoveries. In a rented apartment, for nearly a week, there had been no known whereabouts of Nancy and Carlos. Carlos had been in touch but only responded with messages and never disclosed his location. Surprisingly, it wasn't until August 26th that police finally obtained a warrant to search the couple's vacant rental apartment in Santander. What they found there was truly shocking and left no doubt that Nancy was no longer alive. Blood traces were found virtually everywhere in the apartment. Some attempts had been made to clean them up, but for the most part, they were visible even to the naked eye. In the clogged drains of the bathroom and toilet, fragments of bones, hair, as well as pieces of skin and internal organs were discovered. Forensic analysis confirmed that all belonged to the missing woman, although her remains were not found in the apartment. The crime scene suggested that Nancy had been brutally ended, dismembered in the bathroom, and her remains disposed of elsewhere. Carlos immediately became the prime suspect in the case. He remained unreachable, and his whereabouts were unknown. Also found in the apartment was a package from a small hatchet purchased at a local hardware store. The tool itself was not found, but Carlos Bustamante's clear fingerprints were on the package. Security footage from that store showed that on August 20th, Carlos bought the hatchet, a pair of sturdy rubber gloves, and large trash bags. At a market near their home, he purchased a small cart from an elderly vendor, who immediately recognized the suspect from a photo shown to him. Arrest and search for the body. The day after the grim discoveries in the apartment, an unsuspecting Carlos unexpectedly turned himself in at a police station in Madrid. Trying to deflect suspicion from himself, he went to report Nancy missing, but was immediately arrested as the main suspect in the gruesome crime. Carlos claimed he had nothing to do with what happened, stating they had argued and parted ways on August 20th. He said he left town in a fit of emotion and was unaware of any subsequent events involving Nancy. He suggested that someone might have attacked her when she returned to the apartment to gather her belongings. Carlos's version sounded far-fetched, especially after police found his fingerprints on the hatchet's packaging. In the following days, nearby wastelands, sewer systems, and the coastline were thoroughly searched with the help of divers, but no trace of Nancy was found. The police then decided to track all of Carlos's movements from August 20th to the 26th, using his mobile phone signals. It turned out he had spent 3 days traveling along the coast and had also visited the cities of Bilbao and Burgos before heading to Madrid. It was clear that Carlos was trying to cover his tracks, but it seemed unlikely that he would travel around the country with a dismembered body, leading authorities to continue their search in Santander. Street surveillance footage showed that on the evening of August 20th, he walked toward a large natural forest park. He returned to the apartment late at night and then went out again, this time with a cart filled with oddly shaped bags. There were few cameras in the park itself, so once Carlos entered the wooded area, he disappeared and later reappeared with the same cart, which was now much lighter. He then headed toward the railway tracks, beyond which was a steep cliff overgrown with bushes. From there, he returned much lighter, giving law enforcement a clear indication of where to look for the body. Where is the child? It wasn't until September 16th that bags containing highly decomposed human remains were found in thick underbrush on the hillside. These remains were identified as those of the missing Nancy García, divided into 20 parts with a hatchet. According to security camera footage, everything Carlos transported in the cart was recovered, but something was still missing. Nancy, as we recall, was 4 months pregnant, yet her fetus was not found in any of the bags. The condition of the victim's genitals and lower abdomen showed merciless mutilation with a knife and hatchet, indicating that the perpetrator likely extracted the fetus and disposed of it separately from the mother's body. Carlos consistently denied his involvement, gave conflicting statements, and continued to try to shift the blame onto an unknown assailant. However, traces of the victim's blood were found on his clothing and shoes, which he attempted but failed to completely wash off. Despite Bustamante's refusal to admit guilt, investigators were able to piece together the chain of tragic events and the full scenario of the crime. Forensic experts believe that on the afternoon of August 20th, following an argument, the man brutally beat and strangled his pregnant partner in the kitchen, where traces of blood were found on the floor and walls. Carlos then moved Nancy's body to the bathroom and went shopping at a hardware store and the market. In the bathroom, he divided Nancy's body into 20 parts using a hatchet and a large kitchen knife, placed the pieces into bags, and loaded everything into a cart. He then went to the park, looking for secluded places to dispose of the body. Late at night, he left the apartment with the cart and followed a pre-planned route deep into the park, scattering the bags in various locations, hoping they would never be found. Trial and sentence. The whereabouts of the fetus Carlos removed from Nancy's body remain unknown. He denied his guilt and claimed he loved her. From the time of the gruesome crime until his arrest in Madrid, Bustamante lived off the money he stole from Gorsi's, which he spent daily in bars across various cities. The investigation, the search for evidence and witnesses took law enforcement nearly 2 years, and the trial of the murderer did not begin until July 2022. In November of the same year, Carlos was found guilty of the premeditated brutal murder of Nancy and her unborn child, as well as the dismemberment and desecration of her body. However, many considered the sentence handed down to the murderer to be too lenient. Bustamante was sentenced to 25.5 years in prison, and he was also ordered to pay financial compensation of 150,000 euros to the parents and daughters of the deceased woman. Beautiful, rich, famous, and successful women are sometimes very unhappy in their personal lives. Just think of the story of the Turkish arabesque performer Belgin Sarılmışır, known under the pseudonym Bergen. The most famous woman in Turkey, famous all over the world, was tortured by her husband for many years. He beat her, disfigured her face with acid, and finally shot her. Our heroine today is Ecuadorian performer, television actress, music producer, and lingerie designer Edith Rosario Barmeo Cisneros, better known as Sharon la Hechicera, or simply Sharon. With her own hard work, perseverance, and talent, she has reached heights that one could only dream of, becoming one of the top stars of Ecuador and Latin America in general. Sharon dreamed of simple female happiness, family comfort, and a quiet harbor where she could return every evening and just be herself. But the man she loved, her husband and the father of her child, saw in her only an inexhaustible source of finances for his trouble-free and carefree life. It was this man who eventually became the culprit of the death of the nation's favorite in 2015. But despite the wide publicity, the final point in this high-profile case has not been put to this day. Sharon la Hechicera, Biography, Early Years. The future star was born in 1974, March 28th, in the large metropolis of Santiago de Guayaquil, located on the Guayas River in the province of Ecuador. The full name given to the girl at birth sounds like Edith Rosario Barmeo Cisneros. She grew up in a simple and rather modest family, where in addition to her, there were 2 other children. Soon after the birth of her daughter, the whole family moved to the city of Duran, where the future queen of Technocumbia spent her childhood and youth. Edith, from an early age, was a bright, active, and very artistic girl. At home, she was affectionately called Charo, or Charito, and it was this nickname later became part of her stage name. As a child, Edith was a big fan of the popular American comedy television series Bewitched, another name, My Wife Bewitched Me. Her idol and object of imitation was the main star of this show, the cult actress Elizabeth Montgomery. Then, the same girl began to call herself Charo Enchantress and dreamed of repeating the success of her favorite actress. From an early age, she became interested in music and loved to sing. She had a good musical ear and not bad vocal data, but to call them outstanding was difficult. Nevertheless, the girl conquered everyone with her natural charisma, artistry, and the ability to reincarnate. At the age of 8, she managed to win at the City Children's Festival, performing compositions Fox in Caico, as well as Los Angeles. By the time she graduated from school, she had already won several awards at city and regional music competitions. She dreamed of becoming a famous singer and conquer the big stage, but her parents were skeptical of these dreams. They believed that the heiress is not talented enough to become a star, and since their family has no connections in show business, the career of a performer is not worth dreaming about. Edith, listening to the advice of her family, decided to go to university, choosing a more practical and down-to-earth profession as a public relations specialist at the State University of Guayaquil at the Faculty of Communication Sciences. But her dream of becoming a singer did not go anywhere. Edith believed that everything has its time, and she should wait a little to choose the most appropriate moment. Path to fame. While studying at university, Edith took on any part-time job and tried herself as an assistant teacher in a kindergarten, a seller of sweets and Morocco, a traditional Ecuadorian drink, as well as a dancer in the local creative team, performing at the warm-up of visiting popular artists and musical groups. But all this was only to save money, which she later used to record her debut music album, Braveheart, which was released in 1998. In 2005, the singer released her third studio album and received the prestigious award as the first solo techno-cumbia artist in the country to top the music charts. In 2010, she released her fourth album entitled Poco a Poco, and 2 years later, her fifth album was released, which unfortunately became the last one in her life and career. From the early 2000s until her tragic death in 2015, Sharon was the author, host, and co-host of many entertainment programs and TV shows on TV channels in Ecuador and other Latin American countries. She has been active in television series and has also worked as a public relations specialist for Canalo TV. In addition to a successful career on the music scene and television, Edith also decided to try herself as a fashion designer, creating seductive lingerie by her own sketches. And in this case, she also waited for success, and the brand she created quickly gained popularity among women almost all over America. For whatever business did not take Sharon, she everywhere succeeded, achieving great heights and recognition. Personal life of the performer. Despite the dizzying success on stage, television, and fashion business, the personal life of one of the main stars of Ecuador was not so rosy. She did not like to touch on this topic in conversations with the press, and in every way avoided such questions from journalists. However, Sharon la Hechicera was constantly in the crosshairs of numerous photo and video cameras, so to hide anything from prying eyes was simply impossible. It is known that in the mid-90s, the aspiring performer was romantically involved with an entrepreneur and music producer named Eduardo Gray. For several years, the couple was officially engaged, but the wedding never came to the wedding, although Edith gave birth to a daughter from her lover. She named her heiress Samantha. The daughter inherited the entrepreneurial vein and artistry of her mother, also becoming quite a famous performer and actress. But to surpass her mother, she failed, despite all the efforts and available connections. Soon after parting with Eduardo, Sharon spun a new romance. This time her chosen one was a little-known television operator, with whom she met while working on one of the telenovelas. Their relationship developed rapidly, and after a short engagement, the couple planned a modest wedding, trying to hide this event from others. But the news quickly became public, and the marriage itself lasted a short time. About the reasons for the sudden divorce of the performer preferred to keep silent. Later on, the artist had romantic relationships with a famous impresario named Pedro Francisco, then with a young dancer from the show ballet who performed with her on stage, as well as with some of her star colleagues. Unfortunately, none of these romances did not have a serious continuation, and Sharon broke up with her boyfriends for various reasons. The performer herself did not want to comment on the events that took place in her personal life. She raised a daughter, engaged in career, but still hoped that one day in her life there will be a worthy, loving man. Relationship with Giovani Lopez. In 2009, the performer met a young man named Giovani Lopez, who was more than 10 years younger than her. He was also a native of Ecuador, but as a child, together with his parents, emigrated to the United States. The family settled in New York City, where virtually all of Giovani's childhood and adolescence took place. They first met during a large tour of the singer in the United States, but at that time their communication was limited to work, and Lopez himself helped with the organization of Sharon's performance. But probably, even then, these two have already penetrated some sympathy for each other. In addition, it turned out that the young man was a longtime fan of the Queen of Technocumbia, and he was honored to have the opportunity to work with her personally. A year later, Giovani decided to return to his native Ecuador. He brought with him the designs he had developed for artists, one of which he created specifically for Sharon. So began their collaboration, and almost immediately a stormy romance broke out between them. At the time of the beginning of this relationship, the performer was already 36 years old, and Giovani was barely 24 years old. However, the 12-year age difference did not embarrass them at all, and the couple did not care what people around them would think about it and how they will write about them in the press. Almost immediately, the lovers moved in together, deciding to live together. However, it should be noted that the parents and daughter of the performer treated her new chosen one very cautiously. Giovani immediately they did not like it, and they decided that the young man twisted romance with the star solely for his own selfish purposes, and in fact did not love her at all, but only wanted to use. Sharon listened to the warnings of loved ones did not, because she believed that met the main man in his life, with whom they would live many happy years. Soon the couple married, and the couple began to think about the birth of a common heir. However, here they faced a problem, because the performer could not get pregnant. As a result, she decided to in vitro fertilization, and in May 2012, 38-year-old celebrity gave birth to a boy, who was named Brian Giovanni Lopez, the abusive relationship. Giovani only at first tried to be a caring and loving man on whom you can rely in everything. However, as soon as the couple concluded marriage and the performer became pregnant, the behavior of the young husband began to change rapidly, and he himself literally turned into a domestic tyrant. He no longer sought to earn money independently, and he was quite satisfied with the position of an Alphonse. He willingly spent his wife's money for his own needs, entertainment, expensive clothes, and care for his appearance. In addition, Lopez began to abuse alcoholic beverages and less often appeared at home, preferring to spend time with friends and mistresses. To all this, Giovani began to openly insult his wife, pointing to her age and fading beauty. According to some reports, because of his offensive statements and remarks, Sharon decided to do a number of plastic surgeries to preserve her youth and look like her husband. In particular, the performer enlarged her breasts, did a lift, and several cosmetic manipulations, but all her efforts were in vain and did not help to return to the family peace and harmony. Queen of Technocumbia continued to work actively, starred in TV series, posted entertainment shows, as well as preparing material for the recording of a new album. She tried to smile in public and claimed that she was finally happy in her personal life. However, only people close to her knew about how things were really going in her family. In early 2014, when little Brian was not yet 2 years old, the artist made the first serious attempt to break off the relationship with Giovani. But he said that he would agree to give a divorce only if Sharon will give him half of his property and funds in her bank accounts, so that he, after the separation, could continue to lead an idle and carefree lifestyle to which he was used to. Sharon could not agree to these conditions, and so began to consult with lawyers how to dissolve the marriage, but at the same time, to keep the property and get full custody of their joint young son. By the end of the year, family life became simply unbearable, but the couple continued in public to play the role of happy spouses. One last family trip. On the eve of the new year 2015, the performer gave a number of festive concerts and also starred together with her star colleagues in several dedicated Christmas and New Year's events. After that, exhausted by work, the young woman decided to arrange a small vacation and go with friends, husband, and son to the warm coast to relax a little, try to gather her thoughts, and decide what to do next. On the evening of January 3rd, 2015, the whole company decided to make the return trip. Since the journey was going to be long and they were traveling by car, the friends decided to follow each other and be in constant contact in case someone needed help. They decided to coordinate all the stops on the way in advance. Sharon had to drive the car that evening because her husband had been drinking alcoholic beverages all day. After a few hours, the company made a stop at a gas station and decided to have dinner there in a roadside cafe. During the meal, the singer and her young husband had a big fight because Giovani again ordered a drink, although earlier he promised that he would not drink and get behind the wheel, giving Sharon the opportunity to rest and give time to the child. The couple argued for about half an hour and could not agree on who would drive the car. In the end, their friends could not stand it and asked if they could continue on their way. The singer said that she did not want to delay them because of her family problems, so they could go on, and he and Giovani would have to stay a little longer. The friends reluctantly agreed, and after another half hour headed to their car, leaving the couple at a roadside cafe. They had no idea that they would never see Sharon alive again. Strange accident. On January 4th, around 2:30 in the morning, the friends received a phone call from an agitated Giovani asking them to come back because there had been an accident and Sharon might be dead. His words were a real shock because he did not specify details and it was completely unclear what had happened on the night road. By the time they returned, emergency services were already on the scene, trying to help the victim and reconstruct the picture of events. According to Giovani, on the highway Ruta del Spondylus, near the Ecuadorian province of Santa Elena, at about 1:15 a.m., his wife got out of the car to calm her crying son and change his diaper. At that moment, another car crashed into her at a great speed. This car, without even stopping, sped away, leaving the scene of the accident. The young woman was thrown a few dozen meters to the side of the road from the impact. When the ambulance arrived, she was still alive. She was even taken to the hospital, but despite the best efforts of the doctors, Sharon soon died of massive injuries and internal bleeding. Giovani was still drunk and confused in his testimony, and his story sounded rather strange and not quite logical. The police therefore decided to detain him until morning to question him in detail when he had sobered up. Lopez confirmed the words of friends that he and his wife quarreled all evening and admitted that, contrary to the promises and prohibitions of his wife, defiantly drank alcohol in order not to drive and piss off Sharon. Giovani's testimony. He did not see the license plate number of the car that hit his wife. He did not even remember the make, and only said that the car was white. There were no CCTV cameras on that stretch of road. No witnesses could be found, and the accident itself looked suspicious because Sharon did not even turn to the side of the road before leaving the cabin and did not make sure of safety. Although on a straight deserted road, any vehicle can be seen and heard from afar, even at night. The longer the police tried to correlate all the facts with Lopez's story, the more what had happened resembled not an accident, but a premeditated murder. Giovani was confused about the timing and chronology of events, could not remember details, but most interestingly, he could not explain why their car was turned in the opposite direction to the route they were traveling. After another interrogation, the husband of the dead singer was arrested as the main suspect in the case of her death. The autopsy results and Sharon's funeral. The autopsy revealed that the deceased woman's body had numerous injuries typical of a victim of a traffic accident. However, experts also found a clear and fairly deep mark on Sharon's chest that could have been left by a seatbelt. This fact raised even more questions and suspicions. Samantha, who spent New Year's holidays in the company of her boyfriend, learned about the tragedy from singer Sonia Ramos, a close friend and colleague of her mother. The girl could not believe that all this is really happening. She called her father, Eduardo Gray, and asked him to come to her as soon as possible so that they went to Sharon's home together and began preparations for the funeral. After making all the preliminary arrangements, the body of the celebrity was taken to the Coliseum Cerrado Voltaire Paladines Polo in the province of Guayaquil. To say goodbye to one of the brightest stars of Ecuador came thousands of her friends, colleagues, and fans. Also, this sad event was covered in all leading publications of the country, and on television was even announced a one-day mourning. Grief-stricken Samantha sobbed on the shoulder of her father, and near were her grandmother, grandfather, and uncle and aunt. All members of the deceased celebrity's family refused to comment in any way on what had happened. None of them accused Giovani of what happened directly, but all of them showed their negative attitude towards him. An investigation and a surprise court decision. The case was one of the most high-profile in Ecuador's history. It was widely covered in the press and jeopardized the reputation of the country's judicial system. The initial verdict literally shocked relatives and fans of the celebrity, and the revision of the case was delayed so much that the final point in this matter has not been put to this day. So, the white car, which presumably hit the artist, was found a few days later. The car had characteristic damage which, as experts have established, could be obtained as a result of an accident if you hit a person at high speed. The owner of the vehicle was a young woman named Tatiana Chavez, who categorically denied her involvement in the accident. However, the prosecutor's office opened 2 criminal cases at once: negligent homicide against Tatiana and premeditated murder against Giovani. Lopez's story sounded extremely unconvincing. He was confused and contradicted himself, then recognized the car and even claimed to have seen the driver, then again doubted his own words, referring to alcohol intoxication. In parallel, the daughter and parents of the deceased also filed a statement, blaming the singer's husband for the incident. In their opinion, he never loved Sharon and had a motive for the murder in order to seize her money and get custody of the child. Samantha noted that her mother, shortly before the tragedy, consulted with lawyers about the dissolution of the marriage. Samantha also added that her little brother, who was the only witness to the incident, cries all the time and repeats, "Daddy is bad." However, they did not involve the child as a witness in order not to cause the boy even more psychological trauma. After a detailed reconstruction of the events of that evening, Tatiana was ruled out as a suspect. By comparing the times and places where Tatiana had been seen before and after the accident, it was determined that she could not have been physically near the accident site at that time, and her car had been damaged in another accident. The other car was soon found to be the one that was found to have hit Sharon. The owner, Luis Correo, who had been driving that night, was arrested. By that time, he had already managed to replace the broken headlight and repair other body damage. But experts were able to establish that at the scene of the accident were found shards of glass from his car. Luis himself admitted to everything and said that Sharon literally fell under the wheels of his car, and he was so scared of what happened that he just drove away. In June 2015, Giovani was found guilty of manslaughter of his wife. Experts proved that the injury on the woman's chest from the seat belt was caused by her trying to protect herself before her husband pushed her out of the car, right under the wheels of another car. However, the court verdict shocked Sharon's relatives and fans because her killer was only given 3 years. A retrial and attempts to appeal the new verdict. Such a lenient sentence caused a storm of excitement in the media and provoked a lot of protests across the country. People demanded fair punishment for the murderer of the star, a national favorite. Already in July of the same year, the judges involved in the case were suspended and subsequently dismissed. The new judicial staff canceled the previous verdict, arguing that a number of administrative and bureaucratic mistakes had been made. All attempts by the defense lawyers to challenge the reversal of the verdict were unsuccessful. Luis Correo was cleared of responsibility for the singer's death, but he was still charged with fleeing the scene and attempting to conceal evidence. But Giovani Lopez was brought to every court session under heavy security in order to avoid attacks on him fans of Sharon. In October 2015, the husband of the singer was found guilty of her death and sentenced to 26 years in prison. The court also took into account the evidence provided by Samantha, evidence of Giovani's cruel treatment of her mother, as well as the fact that he blackmailed his wife, demanding from her a fabulous sum for consent to divorce. A few months later, 2 appeals were filed at once. The prosecution demanded to increase the term to the maximum, 35 years, and the lawyers insisted on the illegality of the new sentence. However, both complaints were rejected. In 2021, Lopez again tried to challenge the court's decision. In addition, he stated that he was subjected to ill treatment in prison and his rights were grossly violated. The prisoner even went on a hunger strike to pressure the court to release him. He argued that he was wrongfully convicted and the main perpetrator of the tragedy, Luis Correo, remained free. In 2023, Giovani, already with a new lawyer, appealed again, once again hoping to secure his release. It is worth noting that in this difficult case, the composition of the judges was again changed due to the revealed abuse of power. Therefore, Lopez's defense hopes not only to challenge the verdict, but also to seek compensation for the years spent in prison. Jealousy is a terrible, often destructive force that can blind a person and push him to crime. It was jealousy that caused the tragedy that played out in Costa Rica a few years ago. This case went down in the history of forensics as the case of Gerardo Cruz. But let's talk about everything in order. Samody Fonseca was born in Costa Rica in February 1975. About her family and early years are known a little. The girl's childhood was in an area called Cuba, where she lived with her mother named Sonia Fonsek. Samodi attended one of the local schools and even then demonstrated her difficult and conflicted character. She did not tolerate rejection, often achieved what she wanted by force or deception. According to the memories of local residents, Samodi, thanks to her striking appearance and perfect figure, easily charmed men, but could not keep them. Samodi was very beautiful and skillfully used her appearance, but because of greed and vanity, put material wealth and self-interest above all else, which simply discouraged cavaliers after a short relationship. In addition, she was incredibly jealous and aggressive. In her youth, Samodi Fonsek, thanks to her doll-like appearance, worked for several years in the image of Barbie in one of the large bookstores of the company Universal. It was then that the girl received such a flattering nickname, firmly entrenched behind her for life. Soon after graduating from high school, Samodi had an affair with a successful journalist who worked on local television. The man's name was Osvaldo Fernando Baleri, and he was 16 years older than her. It was the longest and most serious relationship Samodi, but the chosen one never made her an offer. In 1996, the couple had a common son, Christopher, and a year later their daughter Christina was born. But because of constant scandals and attacks of jealousy Samodi, Baleri left the young woman. In 2012, 53-year-old Osvaldo died suddenly, and, as it soon turned out, he did not enter the former lover in his will. The young woman was not going to put up with it, and decided to take matters into her own hands. She went to the house of a former lover and actually seized it, changing the locks there so that relatives and heirs of the deceased could not get in. In addition, Samodi took some valuable items belonging to the deceased. The Baleri family members were quite outraged and immediately went to court to punish Samodi for the theft. The police forced the young woman to leave the house, but criminal proceedings against her were not initiated. Fonsek had many other romances, in particular with Juan Miguel Angel Perez, from whom the woman gave birth to her third child, a daughter named Maria. According to some reports, this relationship was officially registered but ended in divorce after a few years, although other sources claim that Samodi was not married. At the same time, she gave her youngest daughter her lover's surname without his knowledge or consent. It is a curious fact that some lovers of Barbie mysteriously disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances, but for a long time, for some reason, no one paid attention to it. So, for example, one of Samodi's lovers went missing, and according to relatives, it happened soon after he decided to break up with an irascible and aggressive lady. The man to this day has not been found, and many are sure that Fonsek is directly related to this case, but some irrefutable evidence of her guilt could not be found. Samodi's other former lover, whose name was Diaco, died tragically after breaking up with her. He was murdered, and everything looked like a failed robbery attempt, and the mysterious killers were never brought to justice. Again, everyone speculated about Samodi's involvement in the crime, but no hard evidence was found against her. However, her most famous victim was Gerardo Cruz. Cruz, a native of Costa Rica, he was born in December 1992 in the city of San Jose. His own father, the boy did not know, because he left the family before the birth of his son. His mother, Ana Patricia, soon married a man named Hermes Rodriguez, who adopted the baby and raised him as his own. And a few years later, Gerardo had a younger sister, Milena. Childhood and youth of the guy can be characterized as a calm and carefree period. He studied at an ordinary school, was fond of motorcycles, and early met his true love, a girl named Carol. At the age of 23 years, Gerardo, along with his chosen one and their common daughter, 4-year-old Genesis Cruz, settled in the house of his aunt and uncle in the metropolitan suburb of San Sebastian. The young father took a job at a local bakery to provide his family with everything they needed. The couple was quite happy, and soon they learned about the upcoming addition to their family for the second time. In the summer of 2015, Gerardo met Samodi, who periodically shopped at the bakery where he worked. At that time, the woman was already 40 years old, but she was still quite attractive, loved to wear frank outfits and flirt. It is worth noting that with age she began to have affairs with men who were much younger than herself, because the attention of young lovers probably flattered her. Despite the almost 20-year age difference in the presence of a family, Cruz quickly became infatuated with a beautiful woman and began to secretly meet with her. She herself began to visit the bakery almost every day to be able to see her young lover, which did not escape the attention of other employees. In addition, Samodi often appeared accompanied by her eldest daughter, Christina, who was 19 years old at the time. At first, Gerardo managed to masterfully combine family life and secret meetings with his mistress, and so that none of his women did not realize the existence of a rival. But soon Gerardo, as they call it, lost his guard. Obviously, he wanted to boast of his success with women, and he began to tell friends and colleagues about Samodi, about what she is a terrific mistress and spoils him with gifts. Rumors quickly reached his mother, who tried to reason with her son and convince him to leave his mistress. The affair lasted only a few months and broke off in October that same year, 2015, when Samodi found out that the lover had a pregnant wife and a young daughter. The woman was furious. She started calling and texting Carol, insulting her and threatening to kill Gerardo if he didn't belong to her alone. Gerardo managed to beg his wife's forgiveness and keep the family together. As for the former mistress, he did not take her threats seriously, believing that she would quickly cool down and find a new boyfriend. He did not even realize how insidious and vindictive Samodi would turn out to be. Just a few days after the breakup with Fonsec, Cruz became an accidental witness to a blatant scene. As the young man was walking down a downtown street, he saw a certain older man trailing behind a young girl, holding his phone in such a way that the camera was positioned under her miniskirt. The guy was outraged. He also took out his phone and started filming what was happening, then stopped the girl and told her about everything, advising her to go to the police. Cruz then chased after the man, trying to capture his face on camera. He chased him for about 2 minutes, wondering loudly if he was having a good time taking pictures of the girl's underwear without their knowledge, until the man jumped into a cab and drove away. That same night, Gerardo posted the video he had made on his internet page, and in just one night, the video went viral as users quickly identified the elderly man as a former official, an employee of the Ministry of Finance named Luis Sulmano Delgado. Soon, the video was picked up and circulated by the media, and Gerardo himself became a national celebrity. The young man was interviewed almost daily for print publications. He was invited to television and radio programs. He talked about the incident he had witnessed, condemned the actions of the former official, and said that he had no regrets about his action and would do it again. At the same time, experienced lawyers hired by Sulmano Delgado began working against Gerardo, accusing him of wrongdoing. They claimed that the distribution of the videotape made by the guy violated the law and were preparing a lawsuit against him in court. Cruz himself was quite surprised by this turn of events and did not understand why they can judge him, and not the man who committed such a disgusting act against an innocent girl. Gerardo gave his last interview on October 7th on the air of one of the local radio stations. He was sure that he was right and believed that he had nothing to fear. The next day, Gerardo had arranged to meet with his friend Oswald after work, but he abruptly canceled the meeting, citing a sudden emergency. As it later became known, that day, he received a message from Samodi, in which a young woman tricked him into coming to the park in the evening, where he was supposed to be interviewed again. Gerardo didn't even suspect anything wrong and simply believed his former lover. After the end of his shift, he went to the agreed place, but there were not journalists waiting for him, but 2 unknown men who took away his bag, beat him and stabbed him several times in the chest and stomach, and then fled. The injured man, before losing consciousness, managed to call his friend and report what had happened, and the latter immediately called the police and medics. Thanks to his prompt action, Gerardo was taken to hospital, where doctors fought for his life for 42 days. During this time, Gerardo underwent dozens of operations, but alas, to save him failed. On November 19th, Cruz died in the intensive care unit. Since shortly before the tragedy, he became a real celebrity. His condition, without exaggeration, followed the whole country. Gerardo's relatives periodically gave interviews in which they asked all concerned to pray for his recovery. They themselves did not understand who and why could do such a thing to Gerardo. At the funeral of the guy came a lot of people who wanted to express their condolences to his family. Also, everyone expressed hope that the police will quickly get on the trail of the killers and they will be fairly punished. Initially, there were several versions of the crime. The first was that it was a robbery murder. Indeed, Gerardo was attacked in the park in the evening. His bag was taken away and he was stabbed with a knife so that it looked like a common thief. However, just a few days before, Cruz had released a sensational video compromising a nationally known former official. Hence the second theory, a revenge killing. The media openly said and wrote that Sulmano Delgado could well have hired hitmen to remove the young man who had spoiled his reputation. The murder was hotly debated in the press, and people picketed the streets demanding that the killers be found and jailed. The police began to put forward and consider different versions, as well as to look for other possible enemies and ill-wishers of Gerardo. For several months, the investigation stood still, until in May 2016, a video from a street surveillance camera was discovered. The footage shows two men running away from the scene where Cruz was fatally shot. These men immediately became prime suspects, but it was up to the police to identify and track them down. The tape turned out to be a key piece of evidence, and once it was made public, the case moved forward. It was repeatedly played on news programs, asking viewers to look closely, because these could be dangerous criminals. In addition, the police were able to draw up rough sketches of the wanted men and describe their anthropometric data. Soon the identity of one of the men was established because he himself decided to surrender to the police and cooperate with the investigation in the hope that it will help him to mitigate the sentence. Thanks to the information he provided, the investigation quickly came to several other accomplices, as well as the organizers of the crime, Somadi and her daughter Christina. Soon all participants in the crime were taken into custody. In addition to the mother and daughter, several other men were arrested. Cab driver Ronald Archie, who found the perpetrators of the murder, laborer Cesar Chavez, who acted as an intermediary, and a young minor who was directly involved in the attack. Omar Costa, who had been following the victim and reporting his whereabouts on the day of the attack, was also later arrested. The roles and connections of all the participants in the crime were established through phone calls and text messages. The murder was ordered by Somodi, who had planned the whole thing carefully, including her daughter Christina in the details of the plan. Together, they turned to their friends Ronald and Caesar to help them find a couple of hitmen to kill Gerardo and make it look like a robbery gone wrong in a night park. They were later joined by Omar, who had to make sure the victim went to the agreed-upon location. Somodi chose the date of the massacre herself, October 7th. On that day, she repeatedly contacted all the participants in the crime, assigned roles, and made sure that everyone followed the plan. In addition, the young woman demanded that after committing the crime to bring her something of the former lover's belongings as evidence. Cruz, after working his shift, headed straight for the park. He was sure that he was going for an interview, so he tried not to be late for the meeting. But at the agreed place, he was attacked, stabbed several times, and then took his bag and jacket, which were given to the customer as evidence. The main evidence of Somodi's guilt were the text messages in which the murder plan and the roles of each of the participants were described in detail. The woman was so confident in her impunity that she did not even bother to delete them. The motive for committing such a grave crime was banal jealousy. The woman did not want to share a lover with his wife, and decided that if he was not with her, then no one would get it. She thought everything through and involved in her criminal plan her own daughter, who helped her in everything. Mother and daughter were immediately taken into custody, and the fact that to release them on bail was out of the question, because the criminals would probably make an attempt to escape and leave the country. Their accomplices also ended up in pre-trial detention, except for Omar, who was in charge of surveillance, and the youngest participant in the crime was handed over to authorities specializing in juvenile delinquency. The investigation lasted about a year and a half, and only in December 2017, the trial of all participants in the criminal conspiracy began. In addition, it turned out that Somodi had previously been brought to criminal responsibility several times. In particular, she was arrested for forging documents to receive state payments, but then she got off with only a fine. In addition, the story of Miguel Angel Perez, the father of Samodi's youngest daughter, has surfaced. As it turned out, the young woman gave the child's surname of a former lover without his consent, and then, through the court, obtained from him the payment of alimony, which she received more than 3 years. When it turned out that the whole procedure was falsified, the swindler was sentenced to 3 years in prison and a large fine. But the court took into account the fact that she had a small child and commuted the sentence to a suspended 5-year sentence. At the trial, the wife of the murdered Gerardo admitted that she knew about his affair with Samodi and that the former mistress had threatened him with death, but he did not pay much attention to the threats. The main motive of the crime, as already mentioned, was jealousy and wounded pride of the woman, who could not accept the fact that her young lover preferred to stay with his wife. Thanks to the records of phone calls, it was found out that the mother and daughter planned the crime together. It also became known that after the release of the very CCTV footage that captured the killers, Christine had a nervous breakdown. She called her mother, sobbing, and was on the verge of going to the police to confess, but she calmed her daughter, assuring that the investigation will never come out on them. The verdict was not announced until January 23, 2018. According to the court decision, Samodi was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Her daughter, as well as Ronald and Caesar, received 25 years in prison each. One of the killers went to a juvenile detention center, and the second was not found at that time. Omar, on the other hand, who had been following the victim, was acquitted. The family of the victim received $140,000 as moral compensation. After the announcement of the verdict, the relatives expressed gratitude to the court for the fair punishment for the killers of Gerardo. However, it soon became known that the lawyers of Samodi and Christina appealed to the appeals court to mitigate the sentences. The new trial took place in November 2019. At the same time, the identity of the second killer became known, who, according to Ronald, took part in the massacre but was not privy to the details of the plan. Ronald and Caesar also appealed to the appeals court, hoping to reduce the sentence. As a result, the sentence for each of the participants in the crime was reduced by 5 years. Now, Samodi is serving his 25-year sentence in one of the women's prisons in Costa Rica. As it became known in the summer of 2020, she registered a marriage with a woman with whom she met in prison. Her chosen name is Lindsay Diaz Lopez, and at the time of registration of the relationship, the one has already managed to leave the prison walls, released on parole, while Samodi will spend almost 2 decades behind bars.